Hey guys, it's Nate from the Bike Company. We're going to take a thorough look at some of the technologies and the tuning aspects that you have access to fine tune how your bike physically contacts the trail and some of the importance to that. So what you're looking at, these are the 7 tires that typically we're going to stock, and with the differences in sidewalls, in compound, in size, and in tread, this actually represents 53 different variants. So a lot of ways that you can move around in that matrix and really find a tire that's set up for what you're looking to do. So the basic concept for your tire is an air spring. And unlike your suspension, which has a static piston size, the tire is able to deform, and the more contact patch it creates, the more air is able to push on that, the more weight it can support. So as you compress a tire, you're going to see the contact patch flatten and create a larger ovalized area to support that additional weight. There's a little bit of volume ramp too. That's really a fine tuning thing. We're going to kind of skip through that for this episode. We'll look at it in rim protection a little bit down the line perhaps. But as that tire deforms to support that greater load, that's when you start to see the sidewalls deform, and that's what gives you those X's and slashes on the sidewall that you see. Your tire generally wants to stay in a circle shape. So when you mount it onto a rim, it modifies that diameter in or out and takes off the bottom of that circle essentially. So when we get into too wide of a rim, we actually stand up the cornering knobs higher up on the circle. That takes away some of the lean angle ability that you're going to have. So the higher volume tires, because they spread out that contact patch, you can run them at a lower PSI. It is still supporting you because the air piston essentially is larger. The downside can be the tire deformation. So that's where you see a lot of bikes really kind of settling in that 30 mil, 29 mil, right in that range internal rim width, as it gives you a nice sweet spot for almost all of these tires to have enough cornering bite for riders who like to lean into the bike, and enough grip for, pretty much everybody. But if you're looking for a little bit more grip and you're willing to give up some of the lean angle, then that really wide rim will help you there. And there's certain tires that work better with wide rims, and you can ask our guys about that. Certain tire widths are going to be more apropos for those as well. In the last few years, tire technology's come a long way, particularly in sidewall, compound, and what we're seeing when people are looking to get more small bump compliance out of the tire, as opposed to just getting all of your compliance out of the suspension. So that's really a lot of what we're going to show you, and a lot of what the comparison videos are here to illustrate is some of the damping and how you're going to take those aspects to really take your riding to the next level. The aspects that we're going to go through, PSI is going to be kind of a fine tuning so that shakes out, and it's important on all of these. We're going to look at 3 other aspects that are, frankly, when I buy tires, how I'm shopping into tires, and that's going to be sidewall, it's going to be compound, and it's going to be tread pattern. And believe it or not, it's almost in that order these days because there's so many variants that I can get to take that performance and push it over here or over there depending on what I'm looking to do. So sit back, hopefully you learned something, and we'll take a look at these MAXXIS tires. PSI is going to be really your fine tuning, and if you're having to make huge PSI jumps, you might have spec'd the wrong tire to start out with, or you might have a better tire option, maybe is kind of better language, I suppose. Typically on the PSI, you're working in about a 4 or 5 pound window to really dial that in. Now, luckily, your tire is going to give you some telltale marks to let you know where you're at on the lower end. On the higher end, it's going to be more of a feel thing, but let's take a look at the lower end of PSI. When you're running too low of a PSI, the tire is actually deforming on both the front and the rear. And that deformation creates X's up on the sidewall. Those X's mean you're running a little bit too low on the, well, you could be running a little bit too low. You could be running a lot too low. You're running too low on the PSI when you see the X's repeating on the sidewall. When you see the slashes, that's generally the rear facing deformation. Like, I'm going to show you a couple clips where as the tire loads into the turn, you'll see it start to deform on the back, and then it'll start to deform on the front. That's where these marks come from. So if you're seeing the slashes, typically that's about as low as you want to run. Much below that PSI, you're going to start to have squirm. It's not going to have support in the corners. It's going to be more likely to burp air. It's going to be more likely to roll off the bead. It's going to be more likely to snake bite, or where there's a smashed compression and the rim will actually cut the sidewall of the tire. All of those things are more likely when you're running too low of an air pressure. So you do want to have an air pressure in a range that's rideable for you. As we fine tune that, you're going to see air pressure. Air pressure makes a difference in the damping. There's some footage we're going to show you of different PSIs on the same tire, and you'll see the actual rebound on the first bounce isn't too different, but the frequencies change. And then once you see that on the sidewalls, you're going to really see a lot of change. And that's where we talk about the small bump compliance. Being able to run a slightly stiffer suspension, it's going to give you more support in the cornering, more support in the steeps. And if you can get that small bump, kind of take out that harshness through the tires, that's where a lot of the real magic in bike setup is right now. So once you've got that PSI in that range that you know what to work with, you're going to be able to fine tune your setup. But let's get into shopping tires, and let's look at where I start shopping tires these days. And it's going to be for protection, support, damping. We're going to look at sidewalls. So on the sidewalls, we're going to take a look at it. I'm not going to define the technical differences. That's published a lot of places. We're going to go more into what the differences are on trail and how you're going to feel that. Essentially, you've got EXO on the lighter end, EXO Plus, Double Down, and DH. Just know that as we go from EXO, EXO Plus, Double Down, DH, we increase the damping, the support, and the weight on those tires. All right, let's take a look at MAXXIS sidewalls. Now, sidewalls started pretty much as a protection consideration. So a lot of riders were looking at, I don't ride that hard, or I don't ride in that rough a terrain, so no, I don't need these extra sidewall technologies. But again, over the last few years, we've really seen a big jump in terms of how the tires are being designed and utilized as small bump shock absorbers, for lack of a better term. And that's because rubber has a unique characteristic that it can be both a spring and a damper. And so we can take advantage of both aspects of that by using a more robust sidewall technology. So instead of being really about, hey, this is a weight versus protection, and I can balance that pretty, in my head, it's kind of easier. It's more become, it's a weight versus protection, support, and damping advantages. And at that point, we're seeing more and more riders gravitate to heavier, quote unquote, sidewall technologies, even though they might not necessarily be riding in terrain that requires that level of protection. For me personally, I'm the slowest up the hill of all my buddies. I didn't want to go to anything slower rolling. I really resisted that. I ran EXO tires for a long time. Joe leaned on me pretty good about the weight doesn't make a difference to you, and the benefits of that PSI and that damping are going to be huge. So he's got me actually pushed over into EXO Plus front and rear, and considering a double down in the back now. What I've noticed when I'm spinning at a pace where the bike feels lively, I don't really notice any of the extra weight. When I'm churning up that last long hill and it's miserable, yeah, everything, I'm upset that I haven't drained all my water bottles yet. But in terms of the actual rideable weight, I don't know that I necessarily see it, versus how much I do see the improvement in the small bump compliance and how the loads are coming through my hands differently by going to that heavier sidewall with more damping. More sidewall support can equal lower PSI. Now it seems bizarre because how's that working? Well, it's kind of breaks down. The tire is able to give a little bit more support to that air piston through the sidewalls, and that's how you can run a quote unquote lower air pressure. That's really hard to define. I'm sure that there's tests that you could do that would show it. I think overall it's fairly, I'm not sure how much that really affects it, versus the more robust sidewalls allow you to run into those lower PSIs without having the mechanical failures, without having the burping as much, without having the tires roll off the beads, the snake bites, all the things that you might have pushed your PSI up higher to avoid. Well, now you can go back into that ideal PSI range because you're running a more robust sidewall. So that's really where the lower PSI comes from, in my opinion. Now, conversely, the more robust sidewall actually allows you to run a higher PSI as well, if you want to think of it in terms of, and there's a balancing act. At some point you get so high in the PSI that the bike won't bite and it actually is less efficient. But on the other end, if you go too low and it's sticking to everything, churning through everything and not lively enough, it's less efficient too. So you want to be in that window. But the more robust sidewall, if you take your PSI up, you're actually utilizing the sidewall as more of a damper, and you're able to run that higher PSI without the loss of small bump compliance that you might see in a apples to apples scenario. So gives you an interesting level of both sides of the coin, so to speak, when you start looking at running heavier sidewalls. Heavier sidewalls will also going to help you keep off the rim. It's definitely a place to look, as well as tire inserts. We have a bunch of comparison videos here that we did for you guys, and when I first did these, I was really expecting, kind of like when we do the drop test later on the compounds, I expected to see a huge difference in that first rebound. And I really didn't see that in the footage, but what I did see was a very big difference between the heavier sidewalls, the more reinforced sidewalls. They do damp better, and it's seen not through that first spike load back through, but how much more quickly they stop bouncing and finalize that input, versus when you look at the lighter tires, even at the same PSI, the lighter sidewalls, the bouncing frequency goes on much longer. So you'll see that in the footage. Caught me a little off guard, but that's why we do this, is there's always something that you're going to learn. When you look at the sidewalls, again, really you're balancing, what terrain am I in? How hard am I on this stuff? Am I seeing failures? What pushed me over to the EXO Plus is I saw 2 or 3 failures on EXOs where the tire was fine. I just pulled the tire straight off the bead in a fast corner. I didn't want to go up to a PSI that would hold that on the bead because I felt like I was going to be giving up too much traction. So I went to the more robust sidewall technology. Damping, if you're struggling with, man, I really want my fork to run more support. I want my rear shock to run more support, but I don't want to rattle my teeth out. You might look at that heavier, more robust sidewall to do that as well, because it is going to give you an added damper. It seems bizarre, but I will tell you that I basically am shopping sidewalls first, then I'm going into the next aspects of that, because there's, for me, it's EXO Plus, and now maybe a double down in the back, or, I've got guys who are running double downs front and back because they're looking for the ultimate compliance setup, and they're really hard on this stuff. That rider's not generally going to go back over to an EXO. I'm generally not going to go to a DH tire. That's going to be a little different. So now we've taken advantage of dialing in that sidewall, seeing what we're interested in. Now we want to look at compound, and the compound does some damping as well. I'm not sure how much damping it does in comparison to the sidewall and the pressure, but the compound makes a huge difference in rolling resistance. The first time I ran a max grip in the back, we went on a trip somewhere and I needed a more robust tire. It was years ago. you could just hear it sticking. And in my head, it was so inefficient and it bummed me out so much, but stuck to everything. So we're going to take a little deeper look at compounds now. All right, so we've kind of gone through sidewalls, and now it's time to look at compounds. Now, the reality, the most popular compounds are the 3C Max Terra and the dual compound. They also have a 3C Max Grip that, for a big mountain weekend or a trip with chairlifts, probably, it's going to add a lot of grip to your setup if you're not pedaling it, or if you're racing it and you're really looking for that. A little bit more something to put into your wheelhouse. The max speed typically is on the real cross-country end of these tires. Not super, super popular. You can see in our matrix that we only really offer the one tire in max speed, but it is out there. The 3C variant means that there's a triple compound of rubber. Typically, there's a base layer, edge, and center. And then depending on max grip, max terra, max speed, it's different variants of rubber and different variants of how much rubber is laid on top of the base. Not going to necessarily break that down super far because there's a lot of technology in there. What you're looking for in a compound is essentially grip, damping, and efficiency. And it really is a little bit of a balancing act. The max grip, like it says, it's designed to give you the maximum grip. So the center is actually very, very tacky. It also has a lot of damping in the center knobs. The technology, the additives have gone into that. Max Terra still has a softer outer edge. In fact, so does the dual compound. They all have a little softer outer edge. Notably, the Max Terra center, it puts a lot of energy back out. It doesn't absorb as much energy by kind of a decent amount compared to the other tires. When we look at the Bike Co rating system of durometer, surface tension, and damping, these max grip tires, the center section is 47, the surface grip is 8.26, and the damping is 2.39. So really a lot of damping on that. It's very notable. The edge is 42, 11.8, 2.76. Pretty close, If you're riding really steep, burly stuff, you're going to get the most traction with that max grip. The Max Terra, the center is 55, 7.56, and 0.87. So not a lot of damping. A lot of that energy is going back out the other way. Now, I think that could be really efficient for your pedaling. So I think it's probably designed in there because everything else sits in a different range. And then that center section of the Max Terra doesn't necessarily squish that energy and hold it. It puts it right back out. So I think for the pedaling aspect, that's really a benefit there. The edge on that Max Terra is 48, 11.2, and 2.19. So not quite as sticky as the edge of the Max Grip, but still a very confident edge grip on that. The dual compound, the center is a 59, 6.71, and 1.27. Again, it's a little bit harder and a little less damping. The edge is a 49, 11.2, and a 1.61. So slightly softer with slightly more damping than the center section on the dual compounds. The max speed, this one got a little interesting, and I'm going to have to go back and kind of think about how we're doing our numbers on this a little bit. Essentially, the surface tension on these super small lugs is pretty hard to get an equal definition to because they're so small. We were actually seeing distortion on the lug prior to the sled moving, comparatively with the larger lugs where I didn't see that. So the surface tension, I'm not sure I've got a good number on that for the max speed, but the center section is a 63 durometer and 0.96 damping. Again, putting a lot of energy back out rather than absorbing it with the center section of this tire. The edge is a 55 and the damping is a 1.28. It does give you a little bit more bite on the edge. Again, that's a tire designed for speed. Really, you're looking to put that energy right back to the ground and push forward, versus some of the other tires where you might be looking for, man, I really want to stick to this corner and I don't want to give up any of that. The Max Grip, typically used just for a front tire. If you're, like I said, chairlift day, a real specific race, gravity event, you may use it as a rear. They tend to not last as long because they are softer durometer and they're just a stickier, tackier tire that's going to wear faster. You might see a Max Grip in the front, Max Terra in the back. You might see Max Terra, Max Terra. You might see Max Terra in the front, dual compound in the back. Those are kind of the typical go-tos these days. So you can see in the drop tests how different the energy transfer really is between these compounds. Now, this is a 1-inch steel ball. You can compare it apples to apples across the line because we're dropping the same ball. But in terms of how that necessarily affects a full rider smacking through something, I think you're getting more of your damp from the sidewall than the compound. But that damp is helping the compounds stay stuck to whatever you're riding across. So if you're riding across chunky rocks or, really steep terrain, and you're looking for that compound to just glue yourself in there, that damping is going to help that because it's not skipping that little tiny bit more off to where you're losing that traction. So again, for your small bump compliance, I think a lot of that is in the sidewall, not as much in the compound. For the grip, obviously, this is where the rubber hits the trail. The grip is what you're getting with, for the most part, out of your compound choice. All right, so we've gone through sidewalls, we've gone through compounds, and believe it or not, tread is kind of the last thing I'm looking for when I'm speccing a tire, because there's a handful of tires that are going to work in a handful of areas, and you have some choices based on the size, sidewall, and the compound that you want to work with, and we're going to get into that next. Okay, so we've gone over the sidewalls, we've touched on the compounds. Let's look at the tread patterns and kind of some of the common concepts or common pairings, ways that people tend to go. And we're going to start with the more aggressive tires where we will work our way down. Some of them you're going to see more often as a front tire or a rear tire. Some of the more aggressive tires you often see front and rear. There's a little bit of personality fine-tuning that you're going to look at. The Asagi or Asgai, or if you have a better way to pronounce it, I'm all ears. I have no idea. But this is a pretty popular Maxxis tire these days. Fairly aggressive. It's got both braking sipes on the center lugs as well as cornering sipes on the alternating center lugs. This tire clears a decent amount of debris, has a lot of bite. It's available in DH, Double Down, and EXO Plus in the Max Grip configuration. And in the Max Terra configuration, it's available in EXO Plus and EXO. It's also available as a dual compound in the EXO sidewall. Now, the reality on that, most riders shopping this tire are going to be looking at, well, most trail riders, enduro riders are going to be shopping between, say, the Double Down and the EXO Plus. Now, because the Double Down is a Max Grip tire, it might be a front option, but it's not as often going to be a rear option. That's where you might see the Max Terra come in the rear. For riders looking to go down into, say, the EXO sidewall, it's a little bit more of a... it's not as much of a majority sale in this model. This model tends to be EXO Plus, Double Down, and DH for the true gravity stuff. And then you're looking at, okay, well, Max Terra versus Max Grip, where do I want to go? As far as a rear tire, you're going to want to stay 99.9 Max Terra or dual compound. If you're easy on your rear tires, you might look at the EXOs, but typically if you're looking for the EXO, you're looking for a lighter configuration. and you might not want this much bite on that. So you're going to tend to look downstream a little bit. Dissector. Dissector is a very particular tire as far as its usage in our local terrain, that desert, hard packed or loose over hard. It's not going to be a tire for everybody in that terrain. However, it wasn't necessarily designed for that either, and there are other terrains out there. If you like the Dissector, if you like the bigger openings for clearance, it's got pretty good bite. This is a tire that's available in DH, which is a two-ply 60 TPI. The Double Down, which is a two-ply 120 DPI. It's also available in MAXXIS in EXO Plus and EXO, and dual compound in EXO. Not a ton of people are going to run the Dissector with an EXO sidewall. At that point, you might be a lighter rider. You might be looking to capitalize based on your terrain on the clearance. But if you were looking for, the meaty bite of this tire, generally you're going to want a little bit more support. So typically, this is an EXO Plus double down tire as well for a lot of riders. Minion DHF and DHR2, the most popular tires probably out there. Either one will work as a front and a rear. The difference is the DHF has cornering siping, where the DHR has braking siping. So the DHF rolls a little bit faster. The DHR has a little bit more dig, a little bit more braking prowess. These are available in a variety of setups. In the DH, they're both available as max grip as well as the double down. Now, the double down is also available in a MAXXIS in both of these tires, which is a real popular option. You're able to get the faster rolling MAXXIS with the more robust double down sidewall for the extra damping there. They're also available in MAXXIS and max grip and dual compound, looking at my chart, in EXO. So I think a lot of that is from prior models, and they've carried them over. A lot of people are going to use one of these two tires with an Asagi. A lot of people, myself, I run the DHF front, the DHR2 rear, and just loved it forever. The DHR2, if you're looking for something maybe a little faster in the rear, you're going to look at the Aggressor. And the Aggressor has gotten really interesting because it's available in, look at my chart, because this one's unique. This is available in dual compound, double down, and EXO sidewall. This, the Minion and the Minion DHF, you're able to get that harder compound, which is great for a rear tire. A lot of people like that in the double down. This tire does not have the MAXXIS double down offering as of right now. So these are pretty much your enduro trail pairings. And some popular pairings you'll see: Askai with a Minion in the back, Minion with the Minion, Minion with an Aggressor. The Aggressor, I don't recommend it as a front tire. It lacks a little bit of the bite. And if you're good enough to ride this as a front tire, that probably means you should be jumping over to the Recon. You're probably good enough to ride that Recon as well, and it's going to be lighter and faster rolling, which are going to be benefits to you. Kind of wrapping up on the Trail XC end, the Recon and the Icon. Recon is going to have taller lugs, a bit more bite. The Icon, this is just a speed tire. This is for you guys who are real confident that, that's all you need. So you could see either of these front and rear. You could see a Recon front with an Icon rear. I would never do an Icon front with a Recon rear because you always want to have a little bit more bite on your front tire than in your rear tire. So the Recon is available in a EXO Plus and a MAXXIS, EXO and MAXXIS, and EXO in a dual compound. The Icon, we pretty much only bring it in max speed, because if you're that committed to it, just go all in and get the fastest tire you can. To wrap, really, when I'm shopping tires, It's almost counterintuitive because I'm looking at the sidewall I want, then the compound I want, then I look at the size available in the models I want. So for me, typically I'm shopping in this realm in the DHF. If I was looking for maybe a little bit more bite for a weekend trip or whatever, I'm going to go up the hill to this one. Probably going to stay in the Max Stera unless I'm going somewhere just chairlift based, and then I'm going to look at the Max Grip. On the rear, if I'm looking for something a little faster, I'm probably going to go, even though it's a heavier sidewall, I'm probably going to go to the double down dual compound aggressor. I'm going to run it at a little higher PSI and try to get that double down sidewall to give me the extra damp and get a little bit more speed and efficiency from higher PSI and the smaller lugs without giving up all of that performance that I want. If you're in the market for tires, take these factors into consideration because it's going to make a difference in how you set your bike up. So hopefully you learned something, and we look forward to seeing you at bikeco.com and in the shop in Lake Forest at the bike company.